Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Subpart W Refresher webinar today. It is 12:30, and I'm just going to go over a couple of quick announcements and give people just a few more seconds to join us. We are recording today's webinar, and we will be making that available to you along with the slide deck and a couple other resources that we've put together for you after the webinar is over, and we'll get that sent out to you by the end of this week for your reference. We'll also have the opportunity at the end for questions and answers. So as you have questions throughout the webinar, there is a Q&A tool that you can use. You can just post your questions there, or you can post them in the chat. And then when we get to the question and answer time, we'll also take you off mute so that you have the opportunity to raise your hand and even ask your question in person. So we will make sure that we leave a few moments for those questions that you might have, and we'll do our best to answer them, or we'll find an answer and get back to you at some point after the webinar is over. I am joined today by Brian Cromer, our Managing Director, and he's going to start the webinar off for us.
Thank you, Mary Beth, and welcome everybody that's attending. So a little bit about Step to Compliance. We have a 3-step process for all the air quality services we offer and the analysis we do. It starts with defining and documenting things at a federal, state, and local level, identifying and inventorying those rules that could apply down to a region, base and facility, process, equipment, component level, and then tracking and managing those unique activities in perpetuity. So we track over 130 jurisdictions today and over 1,300 rules and hundreds of thousands of citations. We have technology that's a lot like a digital octopus. It is pinging these sites and holding reference to these agencies and these rules. And then as our outreach to the industry, when things change, we will write summaries on this, and you'll have a chance to sign up. It's not marketing, it's our outreach. We're industry advocates, and we really believe that steel sharpens steel. So we're tracking these rules as our contribution, and you're welcome to sign up for that service. Again, there's no marketing in that. It's strictly rule summaries and rule changes. So one of the major things we do centers around leak detection and repair. And so we have a workflow that we offer that will track all of the inspections and the repairs. It has an API. It can collect data offline. You can go to the next slide. It'll allow you to configure your fugitive summaries at the end of the year. We're in the Quad OA reporting season right now. The deadline is October 31st for the last annual period. So that's one of the main things we do. But let's go to the next slide. So before we get into Subpart W, it's very important to know, and we keep putting the slide up there in every webinar, because we have 3 separate mandates or rules or requirements, but they work together. Nothing can happen without these 3 rules. So we have the monetization of methane happening through the Inflation Reduction Act. It sets a waste emissions threshold and assigns a waste emissions fee, and it targets those reporting under the mandatory reporting rule for greenhouse gases in Subpart W. And it is changing how Subpart W will be reported. But unless we're managing methane, even if we can measure it, we can't really assign a credible methane intensity. Subpart W reporting has traditionally been an annual exercise. So if we're only doing an annual inspection or survey, then our leak rate would become worst case scenario, potentially a year. So if we're managing methane under the ABCs of Quad O and doing leak surveys, let's say we're doing it on a monthly basis, then any leak that we can measure under Subpart W or factor we would apply, the leak rate would then come from our survey frequency. So we have monetization, we have measurement, and we have management. And the Inflation Reduction Act is not an environmental law, it's a tax law. But you're in compliance with all fugitive emissions requirements at a state and federal level, which today in the United States, as of this webinar, really have a 95% reduction, or let's say a 5% allowable leak rate. And the leak rate specified, or the waste threshold specified in the Inflation Reduction Act, as we can see here, is at 0.2% or lower, and it's based on the volume of gas sent to sale. So we're consuming the natural gas that we're pulling out of the ground as we're transporting it through our compression, that shrinkage, right? So it's even lower than 0.2% of the total volume of gas we produce. It's based on what goes to sale. There's a different metrics for oil. It's based on, a metric tonnage per million barrels produced. And then if you're in gathering, boosting, or gas processing, you have an even lower threshold of 0.05%. And then when we get into transmission and storage, it's 0.11%. So today, to the best of our knowledge, the Inflation Reduction Act, which passed last August of last year, it's in force, that the tax itself, as we know it today, would start in the reporting year of 2024 and most likely be levied March of 2025 when you turn in your Subpart W reporting, right? That annual reporting bleeds into 2025. But it starts at $900 per metric ton, and it increases to $1,500 a metric ton. And so far, and that's going through it 3 times that Mary Beth's read it, and the times I've looked at it, 735 pages of the Inflation Reduction Act, there's no exemption, there's no loophole, there's no offset. This is a direct tax. It will, according to the Inflation Reduction Act, go away once Quad OC has promulgated, but that's about a 5-year period, including 4.5 from when the rules published. But it's still going to drive the leak rates down to these levels when the tax goes away, because it has to be equally stringent. So next slide. So the mandatory reporting rule passed in 2010. Its first reporting rule was 2011. Its main purpose was to centralize and gather data, and based on our signing and ratifying the 1992 United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, all of this reporting activity in Subpart W and the mandatory reporting rule does get fed up to the United Nations. So that's something that will be important to note for later. And these proposed changes in Subpart W have increased the 100-year global warming potential for methane from 25 to 28. So 25,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalency gets you an invitation to the party to report under Subpart W and the mandatory reporting rule. That is only at the 28-year global warming potential that's proposed in these changes to Subpart W, only 893, rounded to the nearest digit, 893 metric tons of methane. So if you were marginal and exempt from Subpart W in the past, you need to revisit your evaluation, because they've changed the global warming potential, or intend to change it, from 25 to 28. So we would take the 25,000 metric tons, divide it by 28, and we get 893. Something important to note is that, unlike the definition of facilities in Subpart W or Quad O A, B, and C, the definition of facility for Subpart W is all your activity in a single basin equals a facility. So it's really aggregating all of your activity in a general basin, and that's counted as one facility for the purposes of Subpart W. It doesn't mean you only have one facility. You still have to aggregate all of that data from each facility to see if it collectively hits that 893 threshold, but you're reporting your activity basically as a single facility in a given basin. So we mentioned the United Nations, and why do I bring this up? Because there's something called the International Methane Emissions Observatory and the Methane Alert and Response System, the IMEO and MARS. And Mars is under the IMEO. So this IMEO, this International Methane Emissions Observatory, is gathering all that inventory data that we've been putting towards the United Nations, and so has all the other 190 plus member countries that are bound to the UNFCCC. And the IMEO is gathering and creating a global methane model. But in addition to that, has launched an initiative that we have funded, by the way. The United States government, as well as some other parties, have funded this Mars initiative, where there's 5 separate satellite programs that basically will track methane emissions. I think it's important to note, because we have super emitter terms in potential revisions to Quad O, B, and C, and we have these large release events that you'll see in the Subpart W changes. So, I mean, this is a way of qualifying and quantifying methane fugitives on a continual basis. And it's in place now, and many people don't know about it. A few of the satellite programs are still in the phase of launching, but there's 5 separate satellite programs that make up this Mars initiative, or methane alert and response system. So I just put that slide in here. And so I think at this point, Mary Beth, it's yours.
Okay, yes. So we're going to actually, based on that overview from Brian, just on the history of Subpart W and how it's playing out in relationship to the other rules with the Inflation Reduction Act and the proposed Quad O, B, and C, look at more specifically just what's going on with Subpart W, because it's gotten really convoluted because of the Inflation Reduction Act. And so this slide is just some basic information to help you understand which segments Subpart W applies to, and what people are required to be reporting under. As far as the proposed amendments, it all kind of kicked off back a year ago, June 21st, 2022, with an initial round of proposed amendments to the mandatory reporting rule. And this was not just for Subpart W, it was for multiple subparts within the overall reporting rule. But Subpart W was one of the main ones that was targeted. It actually saw the most number of changes and increases to factors and things like that. It had a public comment period that ended in October of last year. And then this last May, they decided within that same docket to propose a few more amendments to the overall greenhouse gas mandatory reporting rule. And that's where the amendments to Subpart A, the general provisions, and the decision to adjust the global warming potential factors came in. This set of amendments has still not gone final. So the initial 2022 proposed amendments are still in process. I believe the public comment period based on the May 5th edition just recently closed. And then as per the Inflation Reduction Act, which called for creating more empirical measurement for the purposes of accurately assessing the actual methane emissions from the oil and gas sector, the EPA had to put out yet again some more amendments to Subpart W. And so when they put out those proposed amendments on August 1st, just a month ago now, they stated that these new amendments will replace the proposed amendments in the 2022 rule. So everything in the 2022 rule will still go final, with the exception of Subpart W. This is a brand new rulemaking. And so really any previously submitted public comments on the 2022 for Subpart W need to be resubmitted. Again, it is in public comment until October 2nd. They are doing, EPA is hosting a technical outreach webinar next week, actually. And so in our slide deck, this is a clickable link that will take you to the registration if you want to attend that webinar. And then also the dockets will take you to the specific docket for each of those rule makings.
And one more thing on that too, as part of the rule tracking service and what you can get, the team has prepared a red line document on Subpart W. It's very hard to read these revisions because it's not a new rule, so you don't have entire text. You have to overlay these proposed changes on the existing Subpart W, and we have that prepared for you. If you're part of our rule tracking, you'll get it. If you sign up, you'll also get it. So just mention there's some value in what we've prepared for you.
Yes. So this gives you an overview of what the 2022 amendments were, all of the different subparts that were included in that. You can see here the Subpart W, and this is what is being pulled out. It will no longer be part of the 2022 rulemaking. It is now its own rulemaking. And so we kind of discussed some of this. They have carried through a lot of the proposed 2022 changes into the 2023, but they've also made some additional changes on top of that. As mentioned, this is a brand new rulemaking, so it's important to get your public comments submitted. And one of the big things with this is that they have moved towards site-specific measurement versus the use of default factors. Now, they do still have a lot of default factors that can be used, but they provide alternative routes to using continuous monitoring data and other measurement opportunities to get more site-specific. They also have you documenting at a more localized level to either the well pad or the tank battery or the compressor station. And they have revised many of the emission factors based on studies that have been completed over the last couple of years. So to kind of go through, what we've done is we've listed out all of the different source categories. This is from section 98.233. This is a link that will take you to that section in the rule. And so we've outlined if it's an existing category or if it's a new category, what revisions there have been to it, and where the emission factors table is, because they've completely overhauled the emission factor tables as well. So pneumatic devices are existing, but they do have some pretty significant changes to how those default factors are going to work. We do have a new section with the nitrogen removal units being added under the acid gas removal section. And then they've also brought in some additional segments that are required to do reporting. This is all existing source categories currently, but there are some updates. So like with blowdowns, they've added some industry segments to the reporting under the hydrocarbon liquids and produced water. They've added produced water tanks for onshore production, gathering, boosting, and processing. Flare stack emissions, they've done a lot of changes in that section, and they've also implemented a tiered approach to the efficiency values, and we have a slide that'll get into that in a little more detail.
And just talking on the stack, the flare stack testing that could be possible, it's definitely related to gas composition. So if it doesn't follow within a not so narrow, they've expanded the definition of the gas, but you won't be able to perform this test itself on your flare. You'll have to use the default factors.
One of the biggest changes is to an existing source category, the equipment leak surveys. They have added in the ability to use direct measurement, but the process of doing this is very cumbersome and going to be difficult, especially for small companies to be able to pull it off, as the required minimum number of leaks to determine a site-specific factor is 50. So you have to find 50 leaks of each component type in order to be able to create a source-specific or a site-specific emission factor. And it involves doing measurement of the leak during the survey as well. And that has to be updated on an annual basis. But also significantly, they've revised the default factors, not only for OGI like they originally did in the 2022, amendments, but they've also now updated the default factors for method 21 and at a 500 ppm leak rate and at the 10,000 ppm leak rate. And then they also added in an additional factor to adjust for undetected leaks. So when you run your calculation, you will also have to add in this undetected leak factor for the leaks that you don't find. And then a few small changes throughout these, nothing terribly substantive. And then as we get over to here, one of the other really big ones that Brian has mentioned that's new is the other large release events. With this 2023 version, they have also brought in addition to the 250 metric tons of CO2e equivalent threshold for triggering other large release, they've also brought in from the Quad O, B, and C, the super emitter program with the 100 kilogram threshold, so that both of those things are listed in here. And as Brian mentioned, you know, this will be reported up through the IMEO and to Mars, and this applies to all industry segments. A big change that's coming under the combustion sources section is the addition of methane slip factors for your rice, and they have different factors based on whether they're lean burn or rich burn. And with the 2023, they've also added in turbines for calculating these methane slip factors. They do allow for site-specific test data to be used in lieu of the subpart C factors, which is where these combustion emissions have previously been reported under and are kind of harmonized with. But those, you have to look at the actual gas composition in order to be able to use site-specific data. You have to meet certain requirement there. Otherwise, you have default factors that are to be used for sources that are using field gas that doesn't meet the specific definition in 98.238. And then another new one is reporting on drilling mud degassing for the production segment. And then also the crankcase venting is a new one. And that's, again, for all industry segments with the exception of offshore production. So lots of changes. This kind of highlights where to look for those changes when you get your red line document so that you know more specifically what you're looking for. There have been 19 definitions added. I've only pulled out 6 of the really key ones. And I'm not gonna read these to you. I just wanted to provide them to you in an easy place to find them. And then, you know, they've done a complete reorg of the emission factor tables. And so, you know, we had 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, 1E. That's all kind of gotten shuffled around. Some of these are completely going away. As you can see that the 1B, 1C, and 1D will be gone for reporting year 2025 and forward. Things have gotten shuffled. Things have been combined together. So 3A and 3B became just W3, things like that. So this is to help you be able to untangle a little bit of that reorganization they did. W7 is not even the same anymore. It used to be the methane emission factors for natural gas distribution, and now it's the methane emission factors for the internal combustion equipment. So this one got moved in under one of these other tables. So a little bit hard to see completely on here, and I know we're running low on time, but I will still try and leave us with a couple of minutes for questions. The biggest thing is there's a shift from component count and regional factors for determining your emissions to using major equipment factors. And so that came out in the 2022 version. It's been revised in the 2023. This table shows you the difference between, you know, kind of what had been and how it pretty much all went away and changed, what was proposed in 2022 and then what's been proposed in 2023. And then over here, are the numbers of the percentage of increase from the 2022 to the 2023 amendments. And some of them are, I mean, the largest one is like 4,250% increase in the emission factor. They're really working hard to make sure that people are going to be paying that waste fee, and how they have just really jacked a lot of these numbers up. So,
And it's important because this is in public comment. So
mhm.
Greg O'Neill, I think, is on with us. I think they have penalized OGI, I mean, distinctly, and the smaller operator, because the smaller operator is not going to have enough leaks in a specific component type to use empirical. So even though the Inflation Reduction Act says that we're going to go from emissions factors to a more empirical measurement of greenhouse gases, it's forcing people to use factors over empirical in circumstance. So it's kind of contradicting itself.
And so to get into some additional increases, this is more specifically the leaker emission factors. This goes through the changes for if you're doing inspections with method 21 at a 500 ppm leak or a 10,000 ppm leak rate, or using OGI. And as you can see in the OGI, the proposed increase in factors, ranges from 168% all the way up to 751% increase in those emission factors. As I mentioned earlier, flare stack emissions, they've provided some different tiers for the default combustion efficiency based on how you're doing your monitoring for those flares, as to which efficiency you get to claim. And then the methane slip for internal combustion equipment. Here's the table 7 that is new in there, and those factors. And you can see it's a pretty significant difference between the lean burn and the rich burn engines that they have. And then also the crankcase emissions being a new section, and it's a very small section in the rule. Really, it just says that you have to use that formula to run your calculations. And so this is the formula that they're providing to determine those crankcase emissions. We do have some additional opportunities to come and hear some longer presentations and some technical papers that we'll be presenting. So both Brian and I will be at the GPA Midstream Convention in September, and we'll both be at the Gas Machinery Convention in October. So if you're going to be at either of those, come see us and learn some more, because we'll be going a lot deeper into some of these. And then, as we mentioned, we do have some additional resources. If you aren't already signed up to receive our periodic rule updates, here's a QR code that'll take you to the link to sign up for that. It does include access to our previous webinars, red line of our current proposed Subpart W. And for those of you who are already registered, you'll be receiving that red line document along with the slide deck from today and a copy of the recording from today. And with that, I have two minutes, but we can stay on a little longer. If there are any questions, you just go in and take everyone off mute. Okay, so if you do have a question, feel free to take yourself off mute and you can ask it, or you can throw it in the chat and we'll be happy to answer it.
I have a question on methane slip. Are we going to be forced to use the factors instead of testing for actual methane slip?
If you are using field gas that doesn't meet the definition of that one section, you will be forced to use the default factors. You will not be able to use site-specific.
So the upstream segment will be impacted more than midstream because their gas quality will potentially be within that range.
Effective dates, Sheila wanted to know. There is a timeline in the proposal. It's in public comment through October 2nd. EPA has said that they will finalize it by August 16th, 2024. in alignment with the IRA and the requirement to have those changes for empirical measurement implemented within 2 years. So August 16th, 2024 is the 2-year deadline that they have that they're working within. These amendments will be effective for the reporting year of 2025. And so the first report that will be done under these new amendments will be in March of 2026.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was asking. Thanks a lot.
Yep. Any other questions?
You think it'll get, I know I listened in on the public hearing, and I don't know, it was on the 21st, I think. I don't know if you listened in on that. It was horrible.
Yeah, I didn't. I was at a different meeting, so I missed out. So
you didn't miss much, but I mean, there was a number, actually, there was a few on there from the oil and gas sector, and they were asking for a 60-day extension. I mean, what are the odds? Because this is falling right in the middle of GMC, you know, I'm like, and it did last year too. So, yeah, I was in my hotel room, you know, finishing comments, but I don't know. I guess we won't know until we know if they're going to extend it.
I don't think they will extend it. Based on, I've had some conversations with Karen Marsh, who was at EPA up until recently, and based on her knowledge, because the 2022 amendments were already out and went through public comment, EPA likely will not provide an extension this time around.
Okay.
So plan on October 2nd.
Okay, thank you.
Well, we are 1 minute over. Any other questions before we wrap up? Nope. Thank you all for your attendance.
Thank you.
Check your
Yep.
email in a couple of days and you'll have those resources.
Okay, we'll see you at GPA.
Sounds
Yes.
good. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.